Sun and clouds for tomorrow and the high at 58. I'm Steve Williams on AM 560, The Answer.
Get the latest weather, traffic, and news updates online at 560theanswer.com. Now, from the Signature Bank Studios. Only the biggest stories, only the biggest guests, and only the biggest opinions. This is AM 560, The Answer.
Top of the morning, Dan and Amy. Last week, Virginia Governor Glenn Youngkin did a media tour declaring DEI is dead at the University of Virginia schools. Yeah, the University of Virginia and the state schools. That hasn't filtered down to the schools themselves in many instances. We mentioned the other day that 45 schools are currently being sued by Trump's Department of Justice for discriminating against honkies. So the executive order is one thing. The back and forth now with Columbia over $400 million in federal cash is one thing. The pausing $175 million to Penn over their pro-trans sports policy, please see Leah Thomas, is one thing. But it is so much deeper than those high-profile cases, as we've talked about with Heather McDonald and many others. So Youngkin, since he made a point of focusing on this last week, decolonializing your syllabus, private workshop and seminar, seeing the unseen, identifying and unlearning colonial paradigms in higher education. That happened Friday at the University of Virginia, this seminar. And who did it feature? Well, you're about to hear a few of them. In this order, William and Mary's Stephen Sheehy, University of Virginia's Tiffany King, and Virginia Tech's Bikram Gill. Professor Sheehy from William and Mary, King from University of Virginia, Gill from VTech, discussing decolonial theory. These individuals would all call themselves social justice warriors, wouldn't they?
Right.
What does that even mean?
In the moment that you grab the gun, like Fanon says, you're no longer oppressed. You're now free. How do we teach that in the class? Just to say that in the class, my students' heads explode, right? To tell them about violence, as a revolutionary tool, as sometimes a revolutionary essential.
We actually need to crash the U.S. settler state, which has incredible reverberations and literally strangles the tentacles that are reaching into the Israeli state.
So we must stand with the armed resistance and work right now to end this impunity by disrupting the flow of weapons to Zionists. Because trust, the armed resistance will defeat Zionism if it was an open battlefield.
Yeah, I've been humbled since October 7th, particularly being in community with folks. Particularly when you're someone who has been doing this work, why stop? This is a profound moment for us, right? And we need to dig in and go harder.
I think putting our bodies on the line sometimes to protect those who are more vulnerable, right? To eat tear gas when we should be doing that and not students. I think that's essential.
So we have to struggle to crash things here. And my students were very, very clear about this. We have to struggle for Indigenous sovereignty right here on Turtle Island. Like there's no way around it, and there's no looking past it at this particular moment.
When that comes time to the university saying, retract that or get fired, I'm confident in myself that I will make that right decision. That is the point of being a guerrilla scholar.
I'm sure that you've been snitched on to the administration about the content in your courses. That has been something that has happened for me, and I don't know what our administration is going to do, right? I know the work that I have been doing. I know the work that I've committed myself to, and I'm going to continue to do the work, right?
People missed out on the significance of what Hezbollah represented, right? Of what the Iranian Revolution represented, and they just fell into the imperialist ideological representation of those movements and forces that were challenging imperialism.
Challenge what the settler state the settlement of the University of Virginia that we're on, which is still a plantation and has all of its plantation artifice up, right?
Not right, but those are three guerrilla scholars in the midst over in the University of Virginia. Glenn Youngkin may want to take judicial notice of. Hardly the only place where this is an issue. Guerrilla scholars decolonializing colonial paradigms in higher ed, violence as a tool of the revolution.
And they're not stopping anytime soon with
Bob
their agendas.
Bob Maranto is a 21st century chair in leadership at the Department of Education Reform at the University of Arkansas. He joins us now. Professor Maranto, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Hey, it's an honor to be here. I guess I'm filling in for my buddy Will Riley, who's way smarter and bolder, but I'll do the best I can.
Yeah, our good friend Will Riley from Kentucky State. Anyway, what are we to make of those guerrilla scholars and their fellow travelers in higher ed?
I mean, most of them don't mean it. They're saying this because it's been a good gig for a decade now, sometimes a lot longer. So people say this stuff. Most of them, when you come down to it, like I remember a couple years back, the Harvard president and Drew Gilkman Faust apologized for Harvard's role in slavery, said they were going to make it right, and then I think ended up putting in 0.2% of the endowment for this, and I thought it was silly. Everybody thought it was silly. I wrote a piece saying, well, look, if you really think that Harvard's responsible for slavery, and I don't think it was. Everybody was doing slavery back then, right? But let's assume you're right. You could give 30% of your endowment to HBCUs. Go for it. Nobody took me up on this, right? Mm-hmm. Mostly this is kind of empty virtue signaling from upper class folks, right? It's not real. There's a part of it that is real. There are people who really believe this stuff, and they don't do physical violence very much, thankfully, but they do lots of shout downs. They do. Last year, this hasn't been covered at all by the press. Greg Lukianoff at FIRE, the Foundation for Individual Rights and Expression, a group I work with a lot, they defend the rights of people on the right. They defend the rights of people on the left. They also have a lot of great reports. One of the things Greg was pointing out last year, pro-Hamas, I don't say pro-Palestinian. I mean, I'm pro-Palestinian. I would say pro-Hamas, often Jew-hating activists, canceled about 100 talks by Jewish professors. And they would say, well, not simply because they were Jewish, I guess, but because they were Jewish and would not denounce the state of Israel, a legitimate state that's been around twice as long as the Ukraine, right? And I mean, I support the rights of the Ukraine to exist. I support the rights of Israel to exist too. They've created a climate of fear on campus. They also get a lot of aid from foreign governments that has not been reported much. The Network Contagion Research Institute did a report on this. And I always tell people, what if Russia were pouring money into American universities to help conservatives? We would be appalled, right? We should be appalled that a lot of universities are getting a lot of money to support groups that are very actively pro-Hamas. I mean, social justice has unfortunately become a huge thing. Mostly it's slogans. Mostly people don't really believe it. They say it because they're supposed to and they move on. But some people do believe it, and some people have made a very difficult climate for free speech, for free inquiry, for arguing about things, which is what you're supposed to do on campus, because of it. And it's going to take years to dismantle it. Here's the thing that's going to surprise you a little bit. I like and I'm not really a Trump supporter, but I like the intent of a lot of the Trump executive orders. But executive orders are exactly the wrong way to do that. A president comes in, says, hey, you want to get federal funds, you have to do these 18 things, whether you believe in them or not. Next president comes in, there's a whole different set of things. Right. I think they need to pass actual laws. We need to have a debate. We need to pass laws. What parts of this stuff are really threats to academia? I think a lot of parts. What parts are not so bad? I mean, I would agree that maybe sometimes the administration's gone too far. I mean, look, we should be teaching about the Tuskegee Airmen, right? But I think we need to have laws. We need to have a 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 months debate and say, what is this? I mean, people don't really know. And a lot of it, I would say, is really bad stuff. One of the founders of critical race theory Angela Davis, brilliant person.
Communist.
But she spent 25 years working for the KGB, the outfit that produced Vladimir Putin, right? What good came out of the KGB? What good came out of the Soviet Union? I mean, you tell me, right?
Well, I mean, to your point about legislation, which I completely agree with, it's also the funding. The Angela Davises and these other guerrilla scholars, as they term themselves, are a lot less of a threat when they're not eternally subsidized by the taxpayer. Let me
jump in there. Nobody knows this. The press has not reported it. It wasn't in the Chronicle of Higher Ed. My buddy Anna Kreloff and Robert George wrote a thing on it last year. The Biden administration politicized $90 billion of annual science funding by saying that you had to have a large DEI component. Some agencies like NASA actually had their grants. The committees determining who got the money were half science experts, which is what we would want, and half DEI experts. And I think this is crazy, right? So what is the current president going to say? Oh yeah, you need to have conservative experts, hire them as patronage to tell you how your grant will make America great again. I mean, this is just bad news. Universities should have revolted against this, and they didn't. So now we're going to face a new era, and I guess we took the money from the last group. We'll take the money from this group, but I wish we were a little better than that.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, right. Basically, let's talk about the tax treatment of endowments, since you raised the issue of endowments, and let's talk about federal funding of higher education, or not federal funding, and not being in the student loan business, and all sorts of they want to talk about paradigm shifts. I've got some paradigm shifts I'd like to talk about in terms of how higher education works and is underwritten, and maybe that would generate more interest in intellectual diversity on campus if there was a little bit more real competition and real financial threats to people who decide to narrowcast their entire institution to an intemperate minority. That's what I would say.
Yeah, I would agree with you. And I'd say, look, the minority could be in the right or the left. It's been in the left the last 20 years. That could shift. Neither is good, I think. I came into this field because, I'm a little right of center, but a lot of my mentors were social democrats who would argue about politics. Mm-hmm. People are afraid to argue about politics now. They're afraid that some DEI person, or maybe in a couple of years it'll be a MAGA person, right, will say, oh, you said this offensive thing, we're going to get rid of you. We got to change that culture, and changing that culture is going to take years, and I think legislation has to be part of that.
Well, I mean, one of the things I liked about the piece that you wrote about social justice is just a very bright line delineation between sort of social justice in its original connotation, and social justice being bastardized to be social justice with the critical theory kicker. And is it a worthwhile an academic endeavor to sort of try to reclaim that term social justice into something more approximating its original meaning?
I mean, I personally was never a big fan of the meaning, because to me, social justice means you treat people as a member of a group, as a member of a class, mm-hmm. not as an individual. And so, a person, a black man, apparently killed my grandmother. Does somebody else just dislike black people? Of course not. That particular guy, not so much. But I work with black people all the time, and black people in the family, right? The whole point of Western civilization, and America in particular, is to treat people to the degree you can as individuals. And we've stopped teaching that in school. We've started teaching people to see each other as members of groups. I just think that's deadly. We've also kind of lost that common patriotism that would unite people across groups. Again, I'm not a Trump fan. One of the big reasons Trump won, he did unusually well for a Republican. He came close to taking the Hispanic vote. Probably took the Asian vote, although the numbers aren't. I haven't seen the numbers. Did very well among the black vote, and a lot of it was this view that we're one people, or one American people, and of course we have subgroups, right? I'm Italian American, but we're supposed to be Americans first, and I think we've stopped teaching that in school.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, I think
we're like that as a country.
Right. I mean, it's one of the. I always bristled at compassionate conservatism back in the era of W, because it sort of implies that conservatism isn't compassionate. Well, social justice implies that justice doesn't cover the cover the area of how society is organized, that you need some sort of adjective to it, and you don't. Justice is, but justice is Justice is individual oriented in its terminology, just as compassion is, or conservatism, but not the two together. That's
every
the thing.
manifestation I've seen of it is zero sum. It says if black folks win, white folks lose, and I think that's a terrible way to construct politics. And I also think it's just wrong. There's a lot of policies. Most policies, I would say, if they're good, they help everybody.
Well, one of the other things I wanted to get you to explicate is the Mott and Bailey approach that the social justice warriors, the critical theorists, use to conflate and confuse and perpetuate the terminology and the underlying philosophy.
Yeah, I mean, they use beautiful words, right? Let's be nice to everybody. Let's make sure every group gets their fair share and all that. And they use them to justify policies that are just not working and sometimes just stupid, right? I mean, defunding the police. Wilford and I looked at this. Although Wilford did the heavy number crunching, I mostly did more the writing. It looks like defunding and redeploying the police has gotten thousands of extra overwhelmingly black folks killed. I mean, this is terrible. Right? We need to look at how policies actually work and not how they're labeled. And this is something that's very hard to get social justice people to agree to do. I mean, partly social justice, it took over the weaker parts of the university. It took over the ed schools, right? And then they, to a good degree, took over the bureaucracy. Not that most ed professors buy this stuff; they don't. But the leaders in the field, unfortunately, do. And that's had a huge impact. If the money disappears, a lot of those folks are going to switch. but in the last 10 years, I was actually at the American Educational Research Association 12 years ago when Arne Duncan, President Obama's education secretary, was denounced as a racist, right? Why was he denounced as a racist? Like me, he wants to close achievement gaps, right? This is crazy. This is crazy stuff. And we need to have an atmosphere where we can criticize it. And if we have an atmosphere where we can criticize it, I think eventually it'll go away. We also need to have public debates about what this stuff means in practice, no matter what the pretty words are.
Bob Maranto, 21st Century Chair in Leadership at the Department of Education Reform at the University of Arkansas. Professor Maranto, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thanks so much. I enjoyed it.
Thank you. And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
Listen to Dan and Amy on your smartphone. Download the AM560 mobile app today at 560theanswer.com/mobile. Gain insight into building strong marriages and raising godly children with Focus on the Family with Jim Daly each weekday at 11:30 a.m. on our sister station, AM 1160. Hope for your life.
MyPillow is excited to announce that they're extending the mega sale on overstock clearance and brand new products. For example, save $40 on the new spring